Joe has 4 degrees in physics and is well understood as one of those polymaths who has demonstrated his brilliance in various fields, all the way from understanding and imaging of cells to artificial intelligence. But I think the most significant thing is been working on this study, and he used some of his retirement funds to go out and buy a lab so that we can do the testing right here on the island and know. So he'll tell you more about it, but please welcome Dr. Ritter.
Aloha, friends. I'm truly grateful to be among so many people who care tonight. People who care about our Aina, and people who care about our children, and people who care about our health. I've worked for several years with Dr. Lauren Pang, with Dr. Beth Savage from SHAKA, with epidemiologists from UC Berkeley, UC San Diego, other places, so that we could actually see what is going on here, and is there real harm? So tonight I'm going to very briefly, in 10 minutes, tell you what we've been working on for several years. This is the Maui agricultural chemical exposure testing. I'm going to give you a very, very abbreviated overview of independent research and proposal that we're doing here for testing. So here's an overview, and our project asks the questions, are we safe, and what's in your body? So on the research fields of Maui, Molokai, Oahu, and Kauai, we see the application of cocktails of herbicides, pesticides, other noxious chemicals, 80 things at a time. We're told it's safe. And the safety claims are based on tests of a single ingredient, not the combination cocktail applied to crops, and through runoff and drift applied to us. And here's just a small partial list. So on Maui, we say, Maui is not a lab, our homes are not science experiments, and our kids are not test subjects. But Maui is a lab, and Maui is an active site for GMO testing. And here I'm showing Kihei, and we have a wildlife refuge here. We have a huge growing city here, and this is the GMO field, and there are several of them. Here's one, and the trade winds go in this direction and blow drift right towards us. And we see atrazine, which is applied all over the world and on Maui, and we know that atrazine causes birth defects, and Roundup is applied, and we know that that's a class 2 carcinogen. On Maui, illegal testing is ignored, has been ignored. Proof of illegal spraying has been ignored for years. And this is an example, this was in the news recently. This is a spray log. Here are data that we got from a company that does wind records. Here is from a government report. And basically, this was illegal testing, which you all heard about recently in the news. The moratorium on Maui was overturned, and the people of Maui are being ignored. And there was an article in the paper the other day. I'm going to really quickly quote my mate Therese, who's in the front row there. She was a Senate candidate. And in the article, information we sent them was basically kudos to friends, environmentalists, and my supporters. We compiled information on restricted pesticide spraying and wind speed. We subsequently presented it to the EPA, to Senator Baker, to the Hawaii Department of Agriculture, to the Department of Health, as well as the head of Monsanto at the time at a shareholder meeting. Thank you, Dr. Savit, for doing that. And then by me and others recently to 2 news outlets, and then I worked with an outfit called the Project on Government Oversight in Washington, D.C. recently. And so this came out, and they've gotten prosecuted. And basically, we reported this to all of these people. Some laughed, all ignored the facts until recently. And in fact, as of press time for this article that came out the other day, Roz Baker didn't even respond to a request for comment on this. So this is what happens with our legislators here. So we're concerned about chemical drift. Aerosols are particles suspended in the air. This can include chemical vapor droplets, and aerosols can travel very long distances, not hundreds of yards. As an example, aerosols travel from the African Sahara to the United States and affect climate. I did some work on measuring those. Aerosols travel from Kilauea to Kauai and give people asthma. Aerosol toxaphene chemical from cotton fields in the southern United States would travel over 1,000 miles and kill fish up in Michigan, and before it was outlawed. So we're talking about buffer zones of a few hundred feet when we know things travel 1,000 miles or more. So this is utterly ridiculous what we're being spoon-fed by the legislature. We allow spraying 100 yards from schools, and people call that a success in the legislature. I don't. On Kauai, it appears there's a correlation between distance from GMO agriculture and illness. So here I'm plotting cancer deaths per 100,000 versus distance in highway miles from Waimea. This is from Doug Wilmer's work. And you can see there is a very strong correlation. The closer you are to the GMO fields, the much higher chance you have and the larger number of cancer deaths. This is very concerning. This is real data. And so this prompted us to look at a study of harm. So what is the truth here? Are people contaminated and sick from drift? Is there a relationship between pesticide syndrome, neurological issues, birth defects, stillborn children on Molokai, cancers, and exposure to agricultural chemicals? The answer is, we're scientists, we don't know. And we don't know because our efforts to find out have been overturned in the courts, and you recall part of the moratorium was about doing testing. And they've not allowed this. So the government's refused to do adequate testing to support disclosure or to enforce the moratorium, so we will do the testing ourselves. And so I ask you, what is in your body? Is there chemical exposure? If so, is there a correlation between disease and chemical exposure? This is what we will look at in the study. That is exposure happening, and is it linked to higher illness rates? To find out, we're performing a research project, and disclaimer, it's not intended to in any way diagnose or treat any illnesses. We're doing this intentionally because by law that would require the Department of Health to regulate it. And that's, there's a conflict of interest there, and that's the fox and hen house issue, right? So this is pure research where we do not require the government oversight to do it, and that is intentional in design. So we're performing an institutional review board approved epidemiological study. Dr. Pang will talk to you about the importance of having informed consent in human testing. And so we are being very careful and doing this at every step. We are trying to make sure that we do this correctly. And we understand that the results, whatever they are, will be attacked, but we are going through a very formal review board process, which I'm told by Beth is almost done. So we will look at the occurrence rates of over 15 different disorders believed to be caused by pesticides and herbicides. We'll look at wind maps to determine exposure levels, and we'll have low exposure control zones as well as high exposure zones, like Dr. Marsh said in North Kihei. And specific illnesses will be pulled from a state database. So Dr. Pang's working with people to do that. Then illnesses will be compared to exposure levels. And we'll get an answer. Is there really something going on here that's dangerous? We will look at drift, and here's an example of wind and drift going through Kealia Pond, which we actually all started looking at endangered species, so because we know the feds would do some enforcement with that. So here's an example of not the actual data we have, but the type of analysis that we plan to do. Here's a fictitious population mapping representing a drift study, where we have winds blowing right here, and we have lower concentrations as you go further and further out in this sort of ellipse I drew. And so we look at how many people are in a different zone, distance from fields, chemical concentration in human samples, in urine, in dust, and in water. And we look at the number of expected illnesses of that type in an area and see if there is a correlation. So we'll plot this and say, is there a correlation with chemical concentration on this axis versus either test chemical in bodies or with an increase in expected illness? So we hope to get an answer, is there harm being done? And a scientific answer, because all of us have heard anecdotes about people who had a hair test or got sick or, and the powers that be go, well, that's not statistically significant. However, in an epidemiological study, you can lump together different parts and get good statistics and good numbers. We'll look at drift and Kihei GMO fields right here that blow right through Kihei. We will use wind maps, and Lauren Pang, Dr. Pang, and this is Dr. Pang, worked on wind maps for determining exposure. Then we'll use very advanced chemical analysis methods. So initially we'll run 800 tests, including water, dust, and primarily human urine. There'll be multiple hot and cold zones with different levels of exposure. And I should point out, we talked to a lot of companies, none of them would do this testing. And that's why I built the lab. So I'll have to put on biohazard gear and do this, but somebody has to do this. Nobody was willing to do it anywhere in the country when we talked to them. There will be a rigorous, repeatable test regimen using advanced robotics I've purchased, and there will be a strict blind sampling and analysis protocols as well as the institutional for review board oversight. So what chemicals will we look for? Dr. Marsh mentioned glyphosate. There are a number of chemicals we're going to look for. As an example, atrazine. It's sprayed all over Maui and all over the world. It's a teratogen. It causes birth defects. It has a number of bad side effects. And it's due to degradation of the atrazine in the body and the soil, and the fact that we also see other triazine compounds that are similar sprayed, we're going to look, for example, simazine, sprayed by A and B, and alachlor, which we found in dust samples we did initial tests on just to make sure we're looking for the right things. We're going to test for triazine metabolites and degraded triazine compounds, looking for a compound called diaminochlorotriazine. And so if there are any chemists in the audience, you have all of these different things that get sprayed, and there are different breakdown paths, and then they make this chemical in the middle. So we're going to look for that. And this will increase our sensitivity. We will also, besides looking at triazine compounds, we're going to look for glyphosate and its metabolite. We're going to look at a number of pyrethroids, like the University of California study that's on the flyer out on the board, or on the table up there. We're going to look at organophosphates, which are known neurotoxicants. And this is significant because we were recently told, there was this great success in the legislature that they would ban chlorpyrifos, but of course it's not banned until 2022. Public disclosure was removed, and you can spray things within, and it can still be sprayed right now with the license, and they said that you can spray within 100 yards of a school or a hospital. And so we are going to look for organophosphates as well, because these are really bad, and we know they're sprayed on Maui. So whatever the results of this objective study are, either way, all we're seeking is the truth. And this is our testing plan. So if you're interested in testing separate, I get asked all the time, will you test me? If you're interested in testing separate from this effort, you can go to tinyurl.com/Maui testing 1. And if you have questions about getting tested, talk to Beth. She's organizing this with SHAKA. And that's all I have to say, and I'll be happy to take questions at the end of the evening after Jeffrey's done. And thank you so much for supporting this, and our thanks to SHAKA for their work.